The morning began as usual. I stood at the kitchen counter pouring orange juice into glasses when the first rays of winter sun began to break through the windows. The warmth of that moment was deceptive, like a quiet whisper before a storm. "Mom, I can't find my cleats." Caleb, my 8-year-old son, shouted from the hallway. His voice echoed off the walls of the house that my husband, Benedict, and I considered our safe haven. "There by the stairs, under the bench," I shouted back, continuing to prepare breakfast. Caleb rushed into the kitchen, his cheeks flushed and full of energy, like a little whirlwind that brings life to our home. "Will you come to watch my practice today?" he asked, looking at me with hopeful eyes. "Of course I will," I smiled, ruffling his dark curls. But inside me, something stirred uneasily. It wasn't anxiety, but a strange feeling, as if invisible threads were tightening the air around me. Benedict was already at the door. His shirt was impeccably ironed, and his tie was perfectly knotted, as if he could be used in an advertisement. He kissed me on the cheek, slightly distracted as he had been lately. "I'll be home late tonight. Don't wait for me for dinner," he said hurriedly. "Something important at work?" I asked, but he just nodded vaguely, avoiding my gaze. When the door closed behind him, a silence hung in the air. I felt my shoulders tense, though I couldn't explain why. Caleb rushed off to school, and I was left alone. The day dragged on endlessly, each moment feeling artificially stretched. I knew I needed to relax, but my thoughts wouldn't let go. Why had everything been so strange lately? Why had Benedict become so distant? In the evening, as I returned home after Caleb's practice, I noticed Eldridge Harper, our neighbor, standing outside his house. He was a short man with deep-set eyes that seemed to look straight into your soul. In his hands was a black umbrella, which he held tightly, as if it were his shield. "Livian," he called as soon as Caleb and I got out of the car. "Good evening, Eldridge," I replied, trying to sound calm, though his vigilant appearance had stirred unease within me. He approached closer, his voice almost a whisper. "Don't go home. Something's not right." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" I asked, looking him straight in the eyes. "I heard noises. Someone was there while you were away." His words were quiet, but each one hit like a hammer. Caleb quieted down beside me, clutching the sleeve of my coat. I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. This was silly, I thought. Our home was our fortress. There couldn't be anything threatening there. But Eldridge's words stuck in my mind like a poisonous seed. As we approached the house, I immediately noticed that the door was slightly ajar. Stepping inside, I felt the air in the house grow heavier. Something here was not right. It was at that moment I realized everything I knew about my life was about to change forever. I pushed the door open a little wider, and it creaked, as if warning me that things were only going to get worse. Caleb huddled close, his small hand gripping mine tightly. For a moment, I held my breath, listening to the silence. Nothing. Just the dull hum of street traffic outside and the faint creak of wood somewhere deep in the house. "Mom, what happened?" Caleb whispered, his voice trembling. "Nothing, sweetheart. Everything's fine," I lied, not even trying to sound convincing. In the hallway, everything looked familiar. Our coats hung on hooks, and boots were neatly arranged against the wall. But the air was different. It was something intangible, like an invisible presence watching my every move. I took a step forward, trying to keep my face composed, but inside everything was tightening. Then I noticed the family photo that always stood on the side table was lying on the floor. Shattered glass glinted in the light from the street lamp outside. "Mom, did you knock it over?" Caleb asked, pointing to the shards. "No," was all I could manage to say. My hand instinctively reached for the phone in my pocket, but I stopped myself. I needed to make sure everything was okay first. I stepped into the living room. Everything looked normal there too, except the window was slightly open. The curtain swayed gently in the evening breeze. "Stay here, Caleb," I said, trying to sound firm. "I'll just check." He nodded, his eyes wide. I wanted to hug him, to shield him from all of this, but I couldn't. I had to figure this out. The kitchen, the dining room, everything was in place. But when I entered the bedroom, my legs nearly gave way. The room was turned upside down. Dresser drawers pulled out, clothes scattered, and a backpack that wasn't mine or Benedict's lay on the bed. Inside the backpack, I found a folded envelope. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside were a stack of photographs. Each one featured Benedict, with a woman I immediately recognized, Serafina, his younger sister. They were sitting at a cafe table, entering a hotel, smiling at each other. The last photo was taken at our house, in our living room where I had just been. A noise at the door made me jump. I turned, ready to defend myself, but it was only Caleb. "Mom, who is this?" he asked, pointing to one of the photos. That's Daddy's sister," I said, trying to sound calm. "Go to the living room, Caleb. I'll be right there." He reluctantly obeyed, and I grabbed my phone and dialed Benedict's number. The rings went on endlessly, but he never answered. The answering machine clicked on, and I threw the phone on the bed, feeling panic rise within me. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't let Caleb stay here. Returning to the living room, I hugged my son and told him to get ready. My hands trembled as I helped him into his jacket. "Mom, what's happening? Are we leaving?" His voice was full of questions I couldn't answer. I opened the door and the cold night air rushed in. Standing on the porch was Eldridge Harper. "I saw someone come out of there, Livian," he said. "You really shouldn't go back there tonight." His words confirmed what I already knew. The house no longer felt safe. Caleb and I headed to Cora Welsh's house, our neighbor. I knew it would be safer there, though I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. When Cora opened the door, her eyes widened in surprise. "What happened, dear?" she asked, quickly ushering us inside. I didn't know what to say. Instead, I just pulled Caleb close and whispered, "Someone was in our house." Cora nodded and closed the door, locking all the bolts. But at that moment, I knew the night was just beginning. I sat on the soft couch in Cora's house, holding Caleb, who had fallen asleep on my lap despite everything that had happened. His small hand still clutched the sleeve of my jacket, as if he was afraid I would disappear. The room was quiet. Only the old grandfather clock on the wall ticked with slow, heavy beats. Cora brought me a cup of hot tea, her kind eyes filled with worry. "Livian, you look like you've seen a ghost. What happened at the house?" she asked, sitting down across from me. I wanted to tell her everything, but the words stuck in my throat. My head was filled with images: the shattered photo, the backpack, the photos of Benedict with Serafina. My husband, my reliable, reserved Benedict, had suddenly become a stranger. Every memory of him now seemed like a lie. "I don't know, Cora," I finally breathed out. "But there was something, or someone." My words sounded helpless. Even as I said them, I felt a shiver run through me. This wasn't just a threat to my home. It was a threat to everything I considered my safe world. Cora reached out her warm, work-roughened hand. "Livian, you're not alone. You understand? Whatever happens, we'll get through it." But would we? Inside me, anxiety grew, turning into a dark knot that squeezed my heart. If it had been a random burglar, why leave the photos? Why Serafina? Memories flooded back. The last time I saw her was 3 months ago when she came to a family dinner. Her bright red hair was braided, and her smile seemed too elaborate, like a mask. She barely spoke to me, avoiding my gaze. But now her image, frozen in the photo, was filled with something else. Defiance, even malice. Could she be involved in all of this? Why was she with Benedict in those places? Cora interrupted my thoughts. "Have you called Benedict?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. He didn't answer. The words came out barely audible. Cora sighed as if that gesture could lift the weight from my shoulders. "Maybe it would be better if you called the police? They should know someone was in your house." The idea was sensible, but I felt this was more than just a break-in. It was personal. And the police couldn't explain what was happening inside me now. I stood up from the couch, feeling drawn to the window. Looking out, I saw the empty street, bathed in the light of the street lamps. In their cold, artificial light, everything seemed lifeless. And then, like a flash, I saw movement. A figure. Someone was standing in the shadows across from our house. I quickly stepped back from the window, my heart racing. Could it just be my paranoia? Or was someone really watching me? Livien, what happened? Cora came up to me, her voice laced with concern. There's someone out there, I whispered. She frowned and looked out the window, but the street was empty. Only the rustling of trees and the light of passing cars. There's no one there, dear. You're just tired. Today has been a tough day. Cora put her arm around my shoulders. Her gesture was comforting, but it couldn't erase the feeling of terror coursing through my veins. Later that night, when everything had quieted down and Caleb was sleeping peacefully in the room Cora had prepared for us, I was left alone in the living room. The lamplight seemed too bright, but I was afraid to turn it off, afraid to let the shadows take over the room. I picked up the photos again, flipping through them one by one. Something here didn't add up. It was like pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit together, but I knew the answer was close. On the back of one of the photos was an address. I read it several times, not believing my eyes. It was a warehouse in the industrial zone on the outskirts of the city. Why was this address important? Why was it connected to my husband and his sister? I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep until I found answers. The next morning, I woke up with a heavy feeling in my chest. Caleb was still sleeping peacefully in Cora's room, and outside the window, it was just beginning to dawn. But inside me, there was a sense of impending doom, as if something inevitable was approaching. The photo with the address I found last night lay on the table. Every detail, every curve of it seemed to whisper, "Go there. Find the truth." I tried to convince myself it was a bad idea, but the thought that this place could provide answers to the questions that haunted me overpowered the fear. "You can't go alone," Cora declared when I shared my intentions with her. "Cora, I need to figure this out. I have to know what's happening." My voice was firm, but it trembled with hidden fear. "Then let me come with you. Or at least wait for the police." Cora tried to stop me, but I had already made my decision. I left Caleb with Cora, kissing him on the forehead while he was still asleep. His face looked so peaceful, as if nothing could disturb his little world. I knew I was doing this for him. For both of us. The address on the photo led me to an abandoned part of the city. The warehouse stood alone among empty streets, its gray walls covered in graffiti, and its windows boarded up. It looked dead, forgotten. But I knew something important was hidden inside. I parked nearby and cautiously approached the entrance. The door was slightly ajar, as if someone knew I would come. My heart pounded in my chest, but I took a step inside. Inside it was dark, with only faint beams of light filtering through the cracks in the boards. The floor was littered with cardboard boxes, trash, and dust. But in the middle of this chaos, there was a table. On it lay a folder, as if left specifically for me. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were documents, bank statements, photos. They all pointed to Benedict. His name appeared on every page. But this wasn't the man I knew. These documents told a story of debts, shady deals, and something even darker. And then I saw it. The last page in the folder was a letter. It was addressed to Serafina, written in Benedict's hand. "Serafina, I can't do this anymore. It's gone too far. I can't risk Livien and Caleb. If you keep threatening me, I'll tell everything. Leave us alone." My world began to crumble. What had he been hiding? What made him write this? But more than anything, the tone of the letter terrified me. It was filled with fear. Fear of Serafina. "What are you doing here?" A gruff voice sounded behind me. I spun around. A man in dark clothing stood in the doorway. His face was half hidden by a hood, but his eyes, cold, sharp as knife blades, pierced through me. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "You shouldn't have come here." His voice was low and threatening. He took a step forward and I backed away, clutching the folder in my hands. "Is this all because of Benedict?" I blurted out, hoping to buy some time. "What did he do?" The man paused, a smirk playing on his lips. "Your husband? Oh, he's done enough to earn his troubles. But you're just a nuisance." At that moment, I heard a rustle behind me. Turning, I saw another figure emerging from the shadows. Tall, imposing. I realized they weren't here to talk. I threw the folder on the table and ran, not looking back. My fear drove me, but I could hear their footsteps behind me. My car was my only salvation. Jumping into the driver's seat, I slammed the door shut and turned the key. The engine roared to life, and I floored the gas pedal. The car lurched forward, leaving them behind. Returning to Cora's house, I felt a shiver run through my entire body. Caleb rushed to me, his eyes filled with worry. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, hugging me tightly. "Everything's fine, sweetheart." "Everything's fine," I breathed out, though I knew it was a lie. I showed the folder to Cora. Her face paled as she flipped through the documents. "Livienne, this is more than just family trouble. This is dangerous." I looked at her, feeling the panic rise within me. My husband had been hiding more than I could have imagined. And now it was more than just a threat to my family. It was a reality that could destroy us. But one thing was clear. Serafina was more than just a part of this story. She was the key. And I had to find her to understand the truth, even if it would break my heart. The day was gray and cold, but it seemed unimportant. The only thing occupying my mind was the questions I still couldn't find answers to. Why Serafina? Why had my husband gotten involved in this? And most importantly, how much did this threaten me and Caleb? The folder that lay on the kitchen table in Cora's house was like Pandora's box for me. Each page revealed a new, even more terrifying side of Benedict's life. His debts, questionable transactions, collaborations with shady figures. But the letter? The letter was the point where I realized Serafina was not just his younger sister. She was the link between him and something much darker. I couldn't wait any longer. Time was against me. If these people were ready to watch me, threaten me, it meant I couldn't afford to stay in the shadows. "Cora, can you watch Caleb?" I asked, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. "Are you going somewhere?" She looked concerned, her eyes gleaming with unspoken words. "I need to meet with Serafina. She has to explain everything to me." Cora wanted to object, but she stopped when she saw the expression on my face. I was on the edge, and she knew she couldn't hold me back. "Be careful, Livienne," she said, squeezing my hand. "And call if something goes wrong." Serafina lived in an old building on the outskirts of the city. The house looked like it had been long forgotten. Peeling paint, a lopsided fence. It was a place where people went to hide, to disappear. When I knocked on the door, it felt like time stood still. Behind the wooden panel, I heard footsteps, then the slow, cautious opening of the lock. The door cracked open, and I saw her. Her red hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, her face gaunt and her eyes empty as if she was tired of life. "Livienne," she exhaled, her voice sharp like a shard of glass. "You shouldn't have come." "We need to talk, Serafina," I said, pushing the door open and stepping inside. She didn't resist, but her tense posture said she was ready to defend herself. The room was a mess. Newspapers scattered everywhere, books, empty coffee mugs. The only thing that stood out was a small table with a laptop and photos. More photos of Benedict. "You knew what was happening and didn't tell me," I burst out, struggling to contain my anger. "You dragged my husband into this. You put my family in danger." Serafina laughed. It was a bitter, almost hysterical laugh. Your family? Livian, you have no idea what you're talking about. I was trying to help him. He was in a desperate situation. And you saw nothing, right? You didn't notice how he was sinking deeper? You were too busy with your perfect home, your perfect child. Her words stung, but I couldn't let them consume me. What did you do, Serafina? What did he do? I asked, gritting my teeth. She fell silent for a moment, her gaze softening. It seemed she was battling with herself, deciding whether I should know the truth. It started small, she finally said. Money he borrowed from someone, then from someone else. They came to me demanding he pay back the debt. He was desperate, Livian. He begged me for help. I thought I could. But then everything went wrong. Who are these people? I interrupted. Who was in my house? Her face paled. She slumped into a chair, clutching her head in her hands. Them. The ones he owed. They don't forgive. They threatened me. Threatened him. But he decided he could get out. He wrote me that letter. She gestured to the letter I was holding. It was his way of saying no. But now everything is out of control. You don't understand what you've put us all at risk for. My voice trembled, tears filling my eyes. I found the photos. They were watching me, Serafina. They knew I would find that letter. She looked at me, her eyes burning with a mix of regret and fear. You weren't supposed to find it. I tried to stop them. But now you're their next target. Those words hit me like lightning. Everything I knew, everything that seemed real, crumbled to dust. What do I do? I whispered. Serafina stood up, her body tense like a cornered animal. I'll help you, Livian. But you need to be ready. Benedict, he can't protect you anymore. We discussed a plan. Serafina knew more than I could have imagined. She was the connection that held everything together. But now it was all falling apart. I left her house with a heavy heart and even heavier thoughts. Serafina promised to meet me later to tell me more. But one thing I understood clearly. Nothing would ever be the same again. Returning home after meeting with Serafina, I felt like I was on the edge of an abyss. The car moved through the night streets, but the road seemed shrouded in fog. My thoughts were swirling around her words. You're their next target. That phrase, like a nail, had lodged itself in my head, and every beat of my heart drove it deeper. When I reached Cora's house, the silence was almost deafening. I entered the living room where Caleb was sleeping peacefully on the couch, covered with a blanket. Cora sat beside him, her face tense. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said, standing up. What happened? They're coming for me, Cora, I replied, sitting down across from her. I can't stay in the dark anymore. I told her everything. Benedict's debts, the threats, the people watching us. Her eyes widened and her lips pressed into a thin line. Cora knew I needed time to process it all, and she left me alone. Later that night, I sat in the kitchen, going over everything I had learned. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door. My heart raced. Cora peeked through the peephole and sighed in relief. It's Serafina, she said. I opened the door and Serafina stepped inside, her face grim, her eyes gleaming as if she had just escaped from someone. In her hands was an envelope. This is for you, she said, handing it to me. I couldn't live with myself if I didn't give you this. I opened the envelope. Inside were several sheets of paper. The first was a contract. A detailed description of a deal Benedict had made with an unknown organization. The name was smudged, but the purpose was clear. Benedict was to become part of this system in exchange for money that saved our family. Next came threats. Notes scrawled in harsh words. You'll pay for refusing. We know where you live. And the final letter. Benedict had written it, but it seemed he never sent it. Livian, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't finish what I started. Forgive me. I did this for you and Caleb. I thought I could get out, but they won't let me. Please take care of Caleb. You are the strongest woman I know. If I'm not around, know this. Everything I did for you." Tears streamed down my cheeks. It was both a justification and a sentence. "He was trapped," I whispered. "Why didn't he tell me anything?" Serafina sat down next to me, her gaze softening. "He loved you. He was afraid the truth would destroy everything." And in a way, he was right. Not a few minutes passed before there was a loud, almost aggressive knock at the door. I froze. My heart raced faster. "It's them," Serafina whispered. "They're here." Cora rushed to the phone to call the police, but I knew time was short. I grabbed Caleb, who had woken from the noise, and held him close. Cora pointed to the back door. "Get out through the backyard. I'll hold them off." I wanted to protest, but I knew there was no choice. Caleb and I, along with Serafina, slipped out into the dark garden. The cold air cut into my face, but adrenaline kept me moving faster. Behind us, shouts echoed. The door slammed shut with a loud bang. Then a voice. "We know you're here, Livian." We ran. After a few blocks, I heard the sound of sirens. The police. This was our chance. Serafina stopped and breathed heavily. Her face was covered in sweat, but she smiled. "They won't get you, Livian. I'll make it right." Before I could say anything, she rushed back toward Cora's house. Her silhouette disappeared into the darkness, and I was left standing on the corner with Caleb in my arms. Later that night, the police informed us that Serafina had held those men off until they arrived. She provided all the evidence and voluntarily agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Her testimony helped uncover the network that Benedict had become a part of. Benedict didn't return. His body was found at the warehouse where I had been earlier. He had tried to escape his debts, but they found him first. I learned this from the investigator, but it didn't come as a surprise. Deep down, I always knew this would happen. A few weeks later, Caleb and I moved into a new home. It was small but cozy. We started over. The memory of Benedict lived on in us, but I tried to leave the pain in the past. Every morning, I looked at Caleb, who had started smiling again, and I understood. Life goes on. It's difficult, scary, but it's worth living. One evening, Caleb came up to me and quietly asked, "Mom, did Dad love us?" I hugged him, feeling the pain stab my heart again. "Very much, Caleb. He always loved us." Outside, the rain began to fall. But now, this rain no longer frightened me. It seemed like the beginning of something new.